Okay, so I'm gonna paint on this neighboring sheet of paper while my cabin sort of dries for a while. I'm gonna watch this. I've got some more green sneaking in. I'm going to put a shadow there so it's not as crucial that it doesn't sneak in. But as always with my demonstrations, you guys painting a little slower helps you a lot. While this is still a little wet, before I move on to the next one, I am actually going to use a little bit more of that dark bluish green, and I want some like shrubs or something on this side. And I'm gonna just pull that down. And it's gonna drift up the side of the cabin because it's a little too wet over there still. But it's gonna add interest later. So I'm not that worried about being able to fix it. So I just squeeze my paintbrush dry again. I'm just gonna pull a little bit of this green across. And that usually will give us kind of the sensation of overlapping like landscape structures. So I squeeze my paintbrush dry. I'm gonna pull that across. And squeeze some of this dry. Like I said, we'll go back, we'll fix that tree in front of the house. Right now, we're gonna shift. We're gonna do a forest. So a lot of times when we have a lot of trees together, the trees will be kind of clumped. So there are two ways you can do this. You can do this completely freehand, or you can draw some of the trees first. Whichever way you prefer. You want to draw a couple of the trees for sure if you want kind of a birch tree in the woods, and those are the ones that we see a lot in like northern Minnesota. They're the guys that are white. So I'm gonna draw a clump of 3 birch trees, and you can see all I've done is draw long kind of double-sided lines, 3 of them together here on the side of my paper. The rest of the trees I'm just gonna put in on their own as I paint. So the first thing I have to do is kind of have to decide what season it is. I think I might go fall, you know, just because it is nearly fall, or it is actually quite fall-like outside right now. And I'm going to mix up kind of a blue-gray for my sky. So I'm gonna kind of riff on the weather we've been having. And you'll see I'm going to go around my tree trunks because I want those. I'll paint those later after everything else is dry. As you can see, I'm just gonna pull this guy down. I need to clean my brush and get a little water in here, just because I don't need this guy, we don't need it to feel completely dark. I just want it to feel fairly gray. I'm gonna pull my sky down a little bit, and you can do whatever color sky you want. You can still do blue sky. I'm just gonna make it look a little gray. You can pull clouds out if you like. You can leave it cloud free. It's up to you. See if I can get a few clouds in here, at least some cloud-like texture. I have enough gray in the sky that if I just get my sky to feel sort of textured. So now I want to think about the background and then moving forward. So when we have trees that are all clumped together, the important thing to think about is that we don't see a lot of distinct trees, and more what we see or feel is color. So I'm going to start kind of at the top up here, and I'm going to use some kind of golden brown. So I've mixed that red or the yellow that's more golden with a little bit of red and a little bit of that kind of orangey brown. And you can see I'm gonna just sort of fill this in. I am going to switch now and get a little bit brighter golden yellow. So I'm not going to worry about keeping with my same color. I want this the overall effect to be that we're in a forest, and so the colors will shift, the colors will change kind of as we go through. So I just grabbed a little more kind of distinctly brown here. And now I'm gonna grab a little bit more of that golden yellow. I didn't wash my brush out though, so I'm kind of keeping some of that brown. I'm gonna pull this all the way down between those trees that I drew earlier. We're gonna add some darks to this forest too. So I'm not, like I said, I'm just kind of thinking about mixing my colors right now. I'm gonna grab some red, put some splashes of red in here while this is wet. So thinking about my wet into wet color mixing, just like when we did the nebula, and just sort of started to fill some of this space in with color. All right, I am going to add just a bit of kind of mix that red with some green. I want to get really dark now, or darker than I have, so that I have the sensation of kind of the bottom or the shadowed part of the forest. Now make sure that I'm going to pop some of that behind my birch trees. I'm going to pull that kind of shadowed feeling down here now. And this is really wet. So now I'm just gonna kind of, I want the forest floor. So you see I stopped painting up and down, and now I'm going side to side. And I want that color to mix. I want those colors to kind of just do what they're gonna do on my palette. I'm gonna switch and mix some blue in with my orange, so then I get a darker kind of brown gray. And I'm gonna put some of that in here so that my trees, when I paint the rest of them, these guys feel like they have some shadows that are coming across in the trees. So I'm gonna push a little bit of that up. Again, I'm just sort of letting that color bloom and do what it's gonna do all on its own. Now I'm gonna grab some brighter yellow, so I'm cleaning my paintbrush off. I'll grab just a little bit lighter golden yellow to finish off here, like some of these last patches that I have in my ground. So I have a lot of blue and red that's making this kind of a purpley tone that's in here. And this is gonna end up being full of little trees and shrubs and things. But right now, it's just kind of a lot of mixy color. So what I can do is I can come in here with my paintbrush handle, and I can give myself the effect of some sort of like shrub. So you can see, using my paintbrush handle, dragging it through that dark, not really worried about branches. I just want kind of this stick sort of an effect. And you can see how that's really gonna pick up some of those darks. I can see if I can do that again over here, and that looks like that's gonna work again. So giving my forest floor a bit of some sticks. I'm also gonna take salt would be great. It would give you kind of a gravelly sort of texture. I can use my paper towel to kind of lighten up some of this. We get some dappled like sunshine effect. Oh, the sun kind of comes through. Oh, I have a really weird triangle shape. Always remember to look that you're lifting shapes that make sense with your paper towel, because those shapes kind of stay. So you can see I have my very early phases now of a forest with some birch trees. Now I'm gonna go back over here to my hut in the woods. And I'm gonna work a little bit with some more gray. I'm gonna kind of see how I work between these two paintings, just to let one dry while I'm working on the other one. So I am gonna put some darker gray. So I mix this gray with blue, the blue and the orange, my favorite way to make the gray. And I can push this back in and I can make, remember that messy green that kind of went everywhere over here? I can shape that now with some negative painting. So I'm painting in to this green shape that I had put on here that I wanted to look like shrubs growing in front of my little hut. Now because this side is the side that's shaded or shadowed, this underside of the eave over here will also be shadowed. So I'm just gonna paint a little bit of that same gray that I used over here along the front of this side of the hut. I'm also just gonna pull down a little bit of that. Now I cleaned my paintbrush out and I'm squeezing it dry. And all I'm doing now is just moving some of that gray paint kind of around on the front part of my hut in the woods. Not minding if I leave a little bit of like texture. I've made my roof feel sort of uneven now. I need to figure out how to fix that. Maybe I can make it look like there's a hanging section here with a post. See if I can pull out enough water to make the effect of a post. We'll see. I don't know if I'm gonna like the way that looks. It's always an experiment. We can paint over it with a darker shadow in a little bit if we decide we hate it. Squeeze my paintbrush dry again. I need just a little bit more of my darker gray. So I'm going back to just my gray and I'm mixing it into my blue and my brown. I don't want to just use black because it will end up being a little too harsh. So I always want to make sure I'm mixing colors together. And I'm just going to extend this a little bit. And darken this very under the eave shadow over here. Just because it didn't feel quite dark enough as it was drying over here. Push in again some of that color down into the side. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is right down here, I want the back woods to really push back. So I'm going to mix some red in with my green so that I get a really dark tone. And then make sure that it's got some blue. Like you're gonna go pretty dark back here. It's kind of a funky gray green. And I want to pop a little bit of a dark line of like shrubbery back here so that my little hut has some good contrast off the back of the forest that's going on behind. If I like, I can make, remember we made a couple pine trees, so I could make a couple of these a little bit more. These are pretty far in the distance in this tiny landscape, right? So I don't need a lot of details. I'm just making them a little darker green than what was there and kind of connecting that darker green with this shape that I bumped into the back of my shed. If I want, I can lighten that up a little bit and I can come back here and I can add a few more darker shadows behind. So I can come back and I can paint again on just so some of the edges of these trees that are back here, just to give this more distinction, just to pop that separate a little bit more. Mixed in just a little more blue. I want this really to feel dark, like deep deep dark woods back here. Now this front section of my roof is wet, so I don't want to go too far that direction. Now because that looks really harsh, I'm going to clean my paintbrush, I'm going to squeeze it dry, and I'm going to soften those edges a little bit so they blend up into my trees from earlier. So I don't want to leave that distinct of a layer. You can see I'm kind of using the texture of my brush to push that. So all I've done is squeeze it, cleaned it dry and squeezed it so that I can kind of push some of those details back a little bit. So I can do the same thing here if I like. So I can squeeze my brush clean. I can pull out some detail at the top of this first like layer. So I can pull out a few highlights on my little bit of pine trees back here so that they have a little bit of definition. Again, those are pretty far in the distance. We don't need to worry about a lot of detail on them. Okay, as I move forward now, I can go ahead and add a little bit more shadow. So I didn't wash my paintbrush. I just had that little bit of squeeze dry in there. But I can make this feel dark all the way up too. If I want, I can add a trail. So I have some of that super dark stuff. I can make this feel like there's a path. Just adding some gray over the top of what I've already painted. I can squeeze my paintbrush dry and kind of pull some of that out, kind of smooth that in, make it look not that well traveled, our little path. Okay. And now I just have finishing details to add on this one. So I can come back here and I can put in some brighter green at the front of this section. I can pull that forward a little bit. So again, I cleaned my paintbrush off and squeezed it dry. I'm just gonna push some of this brighter green all the way across this front. And you'll see as I do that, I pull through to some of the yellow that's underneath, which is always kind of a nice effect. I can also put a little more yellow over the top if I like, you know, if I want to kind of set off this other half. I can use my paintbrush handle if I want, and I can make this feel a little like some grassy spots. Don't overdo it though. You don't want too many of those details. And remember, when you do the paintbrush handle thing, we can't take that back. Like if I do it and then decide, oh, I hate it, or oh shoot, I went kind of crazy and I did too many. There's no way for us to kind of get rid of that, but I can kind of give the effect of this grass sort of being a little bit overgrown, like nobody's maybe been to this cabin in a while. My paintbrush is just squeezed dry again, and I'm just kind of pushing some of this gray-green shadow around. I could hit this back section a little bit, kind of soften some of that transition up from the background to the foreground. I can also squeeze my paintbrush dry and kind of lighten some of this transition, like right the corner between the front and the back is here, so it wouldn't all be that one color, but I don't mind that it's a little rough because, you know, this cabin or hut or whatever in the woods would be built out of wood or something, and a little irregularity is perfectly acceptable. Okay, little cabin in the forest.